Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another Risk at Work webinar from Risk Connect. I'm Catherine Benjamin, the International Marketing Manager at Risk Connect, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Michael Rasmussen, who I'm sure to many of you listening needs no introduction. Michael is an internationally recognised pundit on governance, risk and compliance with over 25 years of experience. He is a sought-after keynote speaker, author and advisor, and is often noted as the father of GRC, being the first to define and model the GRC market in 2002 while at Forrester. Michael is the founder of GRC 2020 Research, and if you don't already subscribe to his newsletter, it's definitely worth signing up for, which you can do so at grc2020.com. If during the webinar you have any questions, please type them into the question box and we'll either address them during our conversation or we'll follow up with you afterwards. So we're thrilled to have Michael on board today to talk about global accountability regimes. Many organisations around the world are seeing a growing array of accountability regulations, including SMCR, which is globally impacting financial services firms with operations in the UK. This has since expanded into other regimes, such as the Australia Banking Executive Accountability Regulation and Ireland Senior Executive Accountability Regulation, among others. So during the webinar today, Michael is going to highlight how to make compliance and reporting sustainable year over year, and how to take a top-down strategic approach to regulations to ultimately drive efficiency, effectiveness, and agility through your organisation. So without further ado, Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Catherine. This is Michael Rasmussen, and I'm excited to be here and spend this next hour with everybody talking about accountability and risk and compliance. My job is research. Some refer to me as a consultant, but I prefer to call myself an analyst. My job is basically to understand what are the challenges organizations face in context of governance, risk management, and compliance, and how they go about solving that with strategy, process, and particularly technology. Today, we're going to talk about accountability and risk and compliance and the growing era of accountability regimes, whether it's UK SMCR, Ireland's SEER, Australia's BEAR, Hong Kong's managers in charge, Singapore's new accountability regime. We'll get into all that. We'll unpack that. But this is a significant challenge on financial services organizations today. But let's paint the broader picture in which the financial services operates. And this is what I call navigating chaos. Today's financial services organization is dynamic. It's changing minute by minute and second by second. New regulations are changing, risks are changing, the business itself is changing. But let's look at the regulatory change. Global financial services firms are on average dealing with 200 regulatory change events every business day. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 52 weeks out of the year. On average, there's 200 regulatory change events coming from 1,000 regulators in financial services globally. That's a lot. You have to keep up on all that change and keep the financial services organization consistent with that change and in compliance with that change. It can be a new law or regulation, a change law or regulation, an enforcement action, or so many more things. From there, you've got a lot of risk change, shifts in industry practices, the geopolitical risks, market forces that impact our credit and market policies in financial services. But then the business itself is changing. Strategy, processes, technology, employees are changing. They move about roles and different functions and responsibilities. There's third-party relationships and how do we manage the extended enterprise in financial services of outsourcers, service providers, contractors, consultants, temporary workers, suppliers, vendors, and more. And then dealing with all the mergers and acquisitions and change in the business itself. Now, the challenge for financial services organizations is trying to keep all of this change in sync. And how do we keep the conduct of the organization, the regulatory compliance, the risk exposure, dealing with money laundering and everything else in the midst of all of this change? And this requires accountability and accountability structures, whether it's required by regulation or not. It simply comes down to having significant accountability structures and responsibilities defined to be able to address those accountabilities, to be able to stay consistent with our governance, risk, and compliance practices in the midst of all this change. The physicist Fritjof Capra stated, "The more we study the major problems of our time, the more we come to realize that they cannot be understood in isolation. They are systemic problems, which means that they are interconnected and interdependent." The physicist here was talking about biological ecosystems, but it applies so perfectly to financial services firms today, that the risk is interconnected. We need to be able to see the different interconnections of behavior and conduct of the organization, the risk and risk exposure, the regulatory compliance requirements. We have to be able to see all this. COVID-19 is just one example. What starts off with a health and safety risk within financial services firms cascades and has this impact on IT security risks at the work from home offices. You look around me and I've got a bike connected to the internet, a speaker in front of me connected to the internet, wall outlets, my blender in my kitchen's connected. I could program with my iPhone if I wanted to. I don't know why I would, but I could if I wanted to. There's IT security risks in the home office environment, and COVID-19 brought us into the work from home environment. There's increased risks of bribery and corruption and fraud and everything else because of COVID-19. It's an interconnected risk environment. And again, this is requiring greater levels of accountability and responsibility to be able to see this risk interconnectedness to make sure that somebody is addressing this and managing this within the organization. So all this frames that compliance is in transition to greater accountability. The past had compliance very fragmented. There's lots of departments responsible for compliance, and that still happens, but there's greater accountability and reporting being put on these departments and functions as far as the future. The past focused a lot on responsibility. I can outsource responsibility. I can take tasks and responsibilities and give them to somebody else. But the future is looking at accountability, where you can outsource responsibility and give them to somebody else. You cannot outsource accountability. The buck stops here. I'm accountable. If something goes wrong, I have to respond to that. And so the future is a future of greater accountability. And in that context, there's going to be greater need to be able to have dashboards, reporting, monitoring of different aspects of risk, compliance, and control, and behavior and conduct across the organization to get real-time visibility and insight into that as well. That introduces us to the era of accountability regimes. Now, I'm a huge Tolkien fan. If you can see the room behind me, half that bookshelf behind me is filled up with Tolkien-related books on Middle-earth and everything else. Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, The Silmarillion, The Book of Lost Tales, and things. I'm a huge J.R.R. Tolkien fan. In Tolkien, you have the one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness bind them. To me, accountability regimes is the uber regulation. It's the one regulation to rule them all, one regulation to find them, all the other risks, compliance, controls, and other regulations, and one regulation to bring them all, and in the enforcement, bind them. Accountability regimes take different aspects of money laundering, conduct, risk management, compliance, controls, and puts accountabilities on those individuals. It enforces other regulations and enforces behavior and conduct in the organization. It is the one ring in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, and in this case, it's the one regulation to rule all other regulations and enforce them. That's how I define accountability regimes. There's a variety of accountability regimes around the world. And again, just to review my point, there's a difference between accountability versus responsibility. Responsibilities, again, I can give to somebody else. I can say, you need to do this task and give it to somebody else to do. But accountability is, I'm actually accountable. Even if I outsource the responsibilities, I'm the person accountable. If there's an issue, I need to stand up to it. I own it. And so we have a variety of accountability regimes that are being put in place for greater accountability around the world. It started with the United Kingdom Senior Managers Regime and Certification Regime, and then has cascaded into Ireland's SEER regulation, Senior Executive Accountability Regime, Australia's BEAR regulation, Banking Executive Accountability Regime, Hong Kong's Managers in Charge Regime, Singapore's Individual Accountability and Conduct Regime. And there's similarities between these, and there's also differences. But it all started with the United Kingdom's, with the FCA, Bank of England, PRA, UK, SMCR. And then cascaded into these other ones out there. And let's sort of unpack these a little bit. Because some of the similarities that we can see is that across these regimes, there's a requirement to the identification of senior management functions that are accountable, and being able to map responsibilities and do responsibility maps, as well as reporting to regulators. So there's common elements across these regimes. I personally find that the UK one has the most depth and requirements to it, followed probably by Singapore's new one that's come out. The differences, though, where they vary is they vary in some of the definitions of the scope of mapping of responsibilities. What responsibilities need to be mapped? There's variations there. There's variations in the definition of senior management type functions and roles. For the most part, they're 80% similar, but there are nuances there. There are differences across the regime for certification and approvals of individuals, in which like the UK SMCR, the FCA, Bank of England, and PRA. I mean, the FCA actually has to approve senior management functions. And we'll get into that in some of the following slides. But the senior management functions actually have to be approved by the regulators. Others, you just have to report the senior management functions to the regulators. There's not an official regulator approval. And so there's differences in the certification and approvals of individuals. And there's also differences I find in the communication of conduct rules, where that's spelled out in the UK SMCR. You have to communicate conduct rules to nearly every employee except for ancillary employees. You don't find that same level of requirement under. I think you can read the requirement underneath, but it's not an actual specific spelled out requirement in some of the other accountability regimes. And there's other nuances. Like I know that Australia requires that some of the variable remuneration of senior management functions be held off for 4 years before they actually get that money that they've earned as part of it as well. And so there's little nuances as well. But the common similarities across these regimes is identification of senior management functions, mapping of responsibilities, and reporting to regulators. But there's differences in that reporting because some regulators require, like the UK FCA will certify themselves and approve senior management functions, while others regulators, they're not approving, they just want you to report on it. So talking about responsibility and accountability, it's like your morning English breakfast, knowing that many that will be watching this will be from the United Kingdom itself. You have different levels of commitment. The chicken is responsible for your breakfast. It contributed the egg, but the pig has a different level of accountability to your breakfast. The pig gave its life for your breakfast. And so the chicken is responsible for your breakfast. The pig is committed and accountable for your breakfast. And that's some of the nuance and difference that we're looking at with these accountability regimes, is that they're really aimed to specify that level of accountability and senior management involvement in ensuring that there's the right conduct and integrity of the organization. At the heart of that, when I talk about UK SMCR and these other accountability regimes, it's really, the regulators are really aiming to have organizations, financial services organizations of integrity. That what we communicate to the world, that we're compliant with the laws, the regulations, the ethics, the values of the organization, that it's a reality in the organization. That we just don't have conduct rules that are out there that, like, nice, pretty pieces of paper, but they're actually lived by in the organization and adhered to. That accountability provides a level of measurement on the integrity of the organization itself, and ensuring that the proper culture and control and conduct is being done throughout the organization at all levels of the organization. So if I had to define accountability regimes in one word, it is about integrity. That word integrity, to be able to achieve integrity in the financial services organization. Accountability is the focus. You've got senior management functions. Senior managers can be held accountable for misconduct that falls within their area of responsibility. Under UK SMCR, to use that as the baseline, if there's willful misconduct, there's knowing wrongdoing happening in the organization, that senior management function can go to jail for up to 7 years. If there's a lack of due diligence or negligence within that function, then that senior management function can be personally fined out of their bank account. The one example that has come to mind is Barclays CEO. Barclays CEO is fined £640,000 under UK SMCR that the CEO had to pay for a whistleblower infraction out of his bank account, not the bank's bank account. So these senior management functions need to be clearly defined, and responsibilities mapped to these senior management functions. And there's a core 24 different senior management functions out there across executive roles, oversight roles, and GRC lines of defense type roles and others. And you need to be able to find these senior management functions, communicate these senior management functions to the regulator, in this case, like the FCA, and get approval on those senior management functions. The focus is to improve genuine accountability by removing ambiguity and clarifying individual responsibility. FCA requires genuine engagement to these senior management functions in their areas of responsibility. But then you have individuals. The individuals at all levels can be held to appropriate standards of conduct. And we'll talk about it in one of the next slides. But you've got certification staff as well as all the other employees, all other staff except ancillary staff. But the certification type staff themselves are, material risk takers, significant management functions, customer facing roles, line managers of certified people. And so you've got the senior managers at the top that have to be approved by the FCA, but the organization itself has the certification type staff, certified employees that are material risk takers and line managers of certified people and so forth, customer facing roles that the organization itself needs to do due diligence on as well. So the scope of accountability breaks out into 3 levels. You have senior management functions. Again, as I've already stated, these are pre-approved by regulators. They have to go approval process through the regulators for UKSMCR, not necessarily some of the other accountability regimes. And they're subject to a fit and proper assessment by the firm, done annually. They have their own set of conduct rules that need to be communicated to these senior management functions. It needs to be defined statements of responsibilities mapped to these senior management functions. There needs to be background checks, such as criminal records on these senior management functions, as well as regulatory references that are all packaged and bundled and reported to the regulator for the overall approval process. And that's the senior management functions. Underneath, the next tier is you have certified employees. These are the ones I was talking about on the previous slide that there might be people that report to senior management functions or significant risk takers or customer-facing staff. And here you have to have annual certification as fit and proper by the firm. The certification regime is overseen by the senior manager. There's regulatory references, and they're subject to conduct rules. Now, the certified employees do not need to be approved by the regulators. The senior management functions need to be approved by the regulator, but the certified employees do not. But there needs to be some level of due diligence within the financial services firm with the certified employees to make sure that they are fit and proper and they have the right background and behavior to be able to fulfill the staff that they have, the position they have. And then you have all other staff. All other staff except for ancillary staff. And ancillary staff can be caterers or receptionists, things like that. But, and all other staff are subject to conduct rules. Now, one of the key things that needs to come out here is, what are conduct rules? Well, conduct rules are policies. Basically, this is how you need to behave. And you have to be able to communicate conduct rules. And there's specific conduct rules for senior management versus all other staff. And you need to be able to communicate conduct rules and track attestations and acknowledgments to that. And as of last month, March of 2021, the rules have gone into effect that all that other staff, need to be able to read these conduct rules and attest to them as of a month ago. And this is going to be an ongoing process, an annual process within organizations to be able to do this. You got annual processes for the senior management piece of it to review and approve and track responsibilities. You've got annual pieces like annual certification as fit and proper by the firm as certified employees and communication and conduct rules and attestations and training around that, as well as annual communication and conduct rules to all other staff, all the other employees, except for the ancillary staff members of the organization. And this isn't going away. And so organizations need ways to be able to track and provide a defensible audit trail and system of record to be able to manage this year over year, because this is here to stay. And trying to do this in documents, spreadsheets, and emails is going to be a recipe for disaster. But I've got a slide coming up on that. I'm getting ahead of myself. So management responsibility statements and maps. So what is clearly needed across these regimes, and again, there's nuances within differences, but as a category, what is needed across, UK SMCR, Australia's BEAR, Hong Kong's managers in charge, Ireland's SEER, Singapore's and things, is to identify who these senior management functions are and have clearly defined statements of responsibilities and responsibility maps that summarizes the management and governance arrangements, the senior management and the responsibilities, lines of reporting, allocations of responsibilities, and how management and governance arrangements fit within the group. And then, the other thing that is more specific to UK SMCR and hasn't been spelled out as much in the other regimes is the communication and conduct rules. And while it's a specific requirement of conduct rules, well, it's a specific requirement of UK SMCR, I believe, even though it might not be spelled out in some of the other regulatory regimes in this area, to be able to achieve compliance, you're still going to need to communicate conduct rules, which are policies to individuals, whether it's a specific requirement as it is in UK SMCR, or if it's not there. I think if you read between the lines, you need to have structures of what proper conduct is and communicate that. UK SMCR is just a little more explicit in spelling out the requirements of doing this on an annual basis. But if you're really going to take accountability regimes to heart, even if the other accountability regimes don't specifically spell this out, I think you're going to understand that it's needed to be able to achieve compliance. Because policies are governance documents, they're risk documents, and they're compliance documents, and you need to be able to communicate clearly what the expectations of behavior are for all these individuals out there to be able to meet that goal of integrity of the organization. I just find that UK SMCR is more forward-looking in spelling out some of the details of this area that the other regimes have not. And you have differences in individual conduct rules and senior management conduct rules. And again, we're looking here specifically at the conduct rules for UK SMCR. Let's start on the right with the senior management conduct rules. There's basically 4 clear statements. You must take reasonable steps to ensure that the business of the firm for which you are responsible is controlled effectively. So basically, the 24 senior management type functions within financial services in the United Kingdom, each of those functions needs to take reasonable steps to ensure that the business of the firm for which you are responsible is controlled effectively. So what's interesting here is that there's technology out there to help us automate the reporting on UK SMCR, but then there's also technology enablement of processes and things to actually achieve this very first bullet on how do we ensure that my area of responsibility, that I'm crossing my T's and dotting my I's correctly, and that it is controlled effectively, and give me dashboards and reports and monitoring into my area of responsibility and accountability in the organizations to ensure and help me achieve this first conduct rule. You must take reasonable steps to ensure that the business of the firm for which you are responsible is controlled effectively. I mean, there's so much in that one statement right there that puts accountability and drives in these senior management functions, behavior to ensure that there's proper controls and monitoring in the processes and things beneath that areas that they have accountability for. The second one, you must take reasonable steps to ensure that the business of the firm for which you are responsible complies with the relevant requirements and standards of the regulatory system. This falls out naturally as a subpoint from the one above it. That we're meeting our regulatory requirements and standards of conduct and so forth. The third one, you must take reasonable steps to ensure that any delegation of your responsibilities is to an appropriate person, and that you oversee this effectively. Now, this third one is clearly defining what I've already defined in the differences between accountability and responsibility. This third one does not let you transfer or delegate accountability. You cannot delegate accountability. The buck stops here. You can delegate responsibilities, but you cannot delegate accountability. This third bullet point to senior management functions on conduct rules is that you take reasonable steps to ensure that delegation of responsibilities is to an appropriate person. I can give people tasks, but I need to ensure that they are the right person for those tasks, and I'm accountable still. I cannot outsource the accountability, just the responsibilities. And the fourth one, you must disclose appropriately any information of which the FCA or PRA would reasonably expect notice. So if there's issues, misconduct and things like that, you have an obligation to report it. Those are the 4 core senior management conduct rules. to those senior management functions at that top level of UKSMCR. But then you have the individual conduct rules to certification staff and all other employees. And so every employee in the organization, except for ancillary staff, again, that's like defined as caterers and receptionists, people like that, every employee has to read and acknowledge individual conduct rules on an annual basis. And these conduct rules state you must act with integrity, you must act with due skill, care, and diligence. You must be open and cooperative with the FCA, the PRA, and other regulators. You must pay due regard to the interests of customers and treat them fairly. You must observe proper standards of market conduct. Now, these are high-level conduct rules. Now, beneath each and every one of these, there's a variety of other policies and procedures that these individuals are going to have to, address. When you have that fifth statement there, you must observe proper standards of market conduct. You're going to get into specific policies on what are those standards of market conduct and how do you do that. And that rolls up into all these different areas of responsibility of the conduct rules. There's other policies and things that apply to that spell things out in more detail that'll need to be communicated as part of this as well. And the conduct rules, are aimed to really address that there's proper behavior happening in the organization. And that it helps to clearly define what conduct is, so that if there is misconduct, it can be easily pointed that it was deliberate because conduct was clearly communicated and people knew what was expected of them. Now, trying to address UK SMCR and manual processes encumbered by documents, spreadsheets, and emails, to me, is a recipe for disaster. It buries the organization in a mountain of paperwork. Hundreds to thousands of documents, spreadsheets, and emails for communicating conduct rules and doing fit and proper assessments and background checks and due diligence. Things get missed and things slip through the cracks. There's a lack of a proper evidence trail. I mean, documents, spreadsheets, and emails by themselves don't have a proper system of record and evidence trail. That this individual has communicated conduct rules on this date and time, they attested to it on this date and time. You can manufacture evidence in documents, spreadsheets, and emails, and the regulators are catching up on this and understanding this. And to be able to have a defensible posture of compliance, we need structured system of record and accountability that gets into the details of this person was communicated this conduct rule on this date and time. They opened it, they acknowledged it. There's some type of signature, like electronic signature, and we have some level of authentication, and that we know that individual was that individual that signed that. Documents, spreadsheets, and emails by themselves don't get you that. You need structured processes that have structured workflow and task management and approaches to be able to document this and ease the burden so things don't slip through the cracks and you don't spend. I've talked to firms that spent 200 hours trying to compile documentation for reporting on compliance that's now just at a push of a button. You can approach this through the labor-intensive approach of document spreadsheets and emails and manual processes, or you can approach it through an agile approach with technology that ensures that things don't slip through the cracks. You have the proper evidence trail and documentation for compliance, and all the checkboxes are checked properly. Now, to address accountability regimes requires a top-down approach. It starts off with your overall strategy, your accountability strategy. And obviously, this is going to get into the definition of the accountability and responsibility maps, what senior management functions are and who aligns to those senior management functions. Part of the strategy is also going to look at your international presence. If you're just in the United Kingdom, for example, then all you have to really worry about is UKSMCR. But if you are a global financial services firm operating in the United Kingdom, and let's throw in like Hong Kong and Australia and Singapore and Ireland and things, you need an accountability strategy that really crosses these different accountability regimes. So how do we harmonize and build into a consistent process accountability across the organization that can address the accountability requirements of these different regimes from different regulators that have similarities, but also nuances and differences that I've mentioned already? So you need to develop your high-level accountability strategy. The first thing to really think about there is the scope of that strategy and what jurisdictions we're operating in, which implies, how many of the regulators we have to respond to that have accountability regimes. And then how are we going to actually manage this whole process and bring it together? From that accountability strategy, we build out those accountability processes. And those processes are going to be, defining senior management functions and responsibilities, building the responsibility maps, maintaining these on an annual basis, reporting to the regulators, and as well as communication of conduct rules and fit and proper assessments and things like that that have to be done on a periodic, most often annual task, and with reporting on that. So what are all those different accountability processes? And then from there, what is the information and technology architecture that can support this in the organization? And how do we get this information? If that information technology architecture is documents, spreadsheets, and emails, you're going to probably have to add a lot of staff to be able to manage and compile and reconcile and report on information to be able to address all this. Where technology automates this with stronger structured accountability trails, audit trail system of records, that is, as well as workflow and tasks so things don't get missed and slip through the cracks as well. So you have your accountability strategy that scopes the overall jurisdictions and process and responsibilities. You've got the processes themselves, such as the responsibility maps and individual responsibilities and the fit and proper assessments and certification and the communication of conduct rules and attestation to those at the different levels, and the information and technology architecture that can support and deliver on this, not just once, but year in and year out, as this is an ongoing requirement for organizations. Technology provides that automation and tracking. It provides structured management reporting that you can deliver to the regulators in the format that they're looking for at a push of a button. That, it doesn't take 200 hours to build that, compliance report. It's there when you need it to give it to the regulators in the format the regulators want. Without strong technology in this area, when you're taking manual processes, document spreadsheets, and emails, it can literally take hundreds of hours to be able to deliver on this across the organization. It has that right audit trail and system of record where you can show that senior management function, read those conduct rules on this date and time and acknowledged and attested to them on this date and time. That you have structured audit trails and system of records of all the activities, the fit and proper assessment to certify that certification staff was done. And here's the due diligence, all the evidence for this. You have the strong audit trails and system of records to provide the regulators when questions are asked. Technology provides the structured and strong workflow and tasks to ensure that things do not slip through the cracks and nothing gets missed. It provides collaboration and enforcement in the environment. The other interesting thing on talking about technology for UK SMCR and other accountability regimes is there's technology specific to accountability regime compliance, and then there's technology because of accountability regime compliance. And there's a difference. And the right platform, like our host today, Risk Connect, can actually deliver both. But think about it. You have all the technology that you need to be able for accountability regime compliance itself. So let's take UK SMCR. We need to have the responsibilities, and so senior management functions defined, responsibilities defined with responsibility maps. They need to be maintained on an annual basis. They need to be communicated to the regulator, approved by the regulator. You have the certification staff where you have to do fit and proper assessments, you can communicate conduct rules to the certification staff as well as senior management functions and track those on an annual regular basis. And you need to be able to communicate conduct rules to all the other employees in the organization out there. And so in that context, you have this ongoing process of collecting all this evidence, the attestations and everything else, the fit and proper assessments. Some of this has to be submitted to the regulators. Some of it just has to be documentation you have to keep internally in case there's an issue that arises later. That's all technology for UK SMCR compliance. But there's also technology because of UK SMCR or other accountability regimes. Say I'm that senior management function that's responsible for operational resiliency. I'm going to want to make sure if I'm ultimately accountable and if I can be fined if there's lack of due diligence or negligence, out of my bank account and not the bank's bank account, I'm going to want to make sure there's technology deployed to ensure that we're being a resilient organization, that there's proper risk management and resiliency processes and defined, impact tolerances and everything else that's required by the regulators in that area. If I'm that senior management function that's responsible for money laundering, I'm going to want to make, and again, I can be fined personally if there's a lack of due diligence or negligence. I'm going to want to make sure that there's proper technology and things defined that monitors money laundering and controls for money laundering in the environment. And so there's technology that is built for accountability regime compliance to be able to manage the process of reporting to regulators and requirements of the accountability regime itself. But then there's also technology because of accountability regime compliance, where I want to, if I'm that senior management function that's accountable for that area, I'm going to want to make sure that that area is monitored and controlled closely to ensure that I'm meeting my requirements because I'm exposed at an individual level if there's an issue. So it's sort of interesting. In fact, I was teaching a workshop in London on internal control management. And usually when I talk about that specific workshop, this is in December of 2019, so before the pandemic. Usually when I teach this workshop, a lot of it is on IT controls and internal controls or financial reporting. But half the organizations attending there were large financial services firms. And most of the day got turned to, UK SMCR. And how do we implement, different types of technology to ensure senior management functions that their specific areas of responsibility are being addressed because they're concerned. And it's all technology because of UKSMCR, not just for UKSMCR. But what's really core to a lot of this that we need to address is defensible accountability regime compliance. And this, again, is where documents, spreadsheets, emails, manual processes break down, where they take hundreds of hours to reconcile information report. I was talking to one firm that found that 80% of their compliance staff was nothing more than document reconcilers. 80% of their staff time is trying to manage documents and not manage compliance. And that just doesn't work. Documents slow the organization down. It takes hundreds of hours to report, and you find you had an issue that started like 11 months ago. They just break down. You need technology that has a structured system of record and audit trail that can show what conduct rules were communicated to what senior management functions, certification staff, or individual employees, on what date and time, when they read those, when they attested to them. What fit and proper assessments were done, what was reported to the regulators, if there were issues or exceptions, how were those documented and reported? Do we check all our checkboxes and meet our requirements? Document spreadsheets and emails just introduce so many avenues where things can go wrong, slip through the cracks, and have an improper evidence trail. You need structured technology to be able to provide the evidence trail and system of record and workflow and tasks to be able to meet these requirements and other requirements and other regulations. Components of agile accountability regime technology is usability. First off, you need technology that isn't just good for what we call the second and third lines, the back office functions of risk and compliance, but also the front office. If you've listened to what I've said, you have senior management functions in the organization, certification staff, which a lot of those certification staff are back office risk compliance functions. We have all the other individuals, except for ancillary staff. They need to be able to read the conduct rules, attest to them, answer questions, and so forth. You need a user interface that is highly usable and intuitive. You need technology that has a low total cost of ownership, that's easy to implement and maintain in the organization, that's highly configurable and adaptable to your organization, can scale as you grow, adapt to your business processes and structure, but still provide the right reports to the regulators and what's required, can integrate with other systems like HR management systems and things to pick up roles, responsibilities, tasks, shifts in roles and things, and kick off, communication conduct rules to somebody that might have been an employee in one department. Now they just moved into a certification staff, and we have to do these fit and proper assessments and things like that. The integration to like an HR management system might pick up that change in responsibility, that all of a sudden they move to this new responsibility that changes them from just a regular employee out there to a certification staff with a fit and proper assessment, and kicks off all these workflows and tasks for that automatically. It has the right analytics and reporting that can provide things in the structured approach that the regulators are looking for, automates the process, and it consistently evolves with the organization as the organization evolves. Technology for accountability regime compliance makes things more efficient, effective, and agile. Efficient, you have time saved from manual processes of particularly reconciling documents, spreadsheets, and emails. You have simplified and streamlined processes. You have significant reduction in reporting time because everything's there in one centralized database at the push of a button. Yeah, you can get your reports and not have to spend hundreds of hours reconciling documents and emails and everything, and reduce staff to manage compliance. That's the efficiency. Time saved, money saved. Effectiveness is greater accuracy, less things slipping through cracks, greater visibility and insight. So you have that less things slipping through cracks. You have an audit trail of everything that happens for a complete and defensible system of record of activities, and allows for easier conversations with senior management functions, certification staff, and general employees. But technology also enables agility. It provides ease of configuration to adapt to a changing regulatory and risk environment, as well as a changing business environment. Risk managed as roles and tasks change and evolve over time as the business grows and restructures. There's streamlined agility during business change, and the ability to quickly identify needs with new employees, roles, responsibilities, and tasks. Careful planning is the key to success to accountability regime compliance. It is a critical plan for your compliance department, for your compliance journey. It is critical to your compliance plan, your journey, by laying out the route ahead of time. So it starts to understanding what your current state is. Where are you at today in accountability regime compliance? What are you doing? I mean, because these regulations are enforced now. I mean, with the exception like Ireland, SEER. I mean, we're looking at a couple months, I think in July, where that's going to come into more enforcement. Singapore has just got passed, but I mean, if we take in the area of UKSMCR, Australia, and Hong Kong, we've had these in place for several years. And now the requirements have evolved over time. Well, they've been staggered. I shouldn't say they've evolved. So like the requirements to communicate conduct rules to all employees across the range of financial services firms, just was last month of March of 2021. But you're doing something today at some level for accountability regime compliance. What is it? What's working? What's not working? And where do you want to be in 2 years? And what's your journey and roadmap to get you there? From there, what's the right technology that can achieve that? Is it documents, spreadsheets, and emails? I don't think so. I think you're going to find that there's a lot of headache, heartache, and time involved, and things still get messed up. What's the right technology that can deliver on your vision for accountability regime compliance, not just for accountability regime, but also because of accountability regime compliance, to provide the right dashboards and insight to those senior management functions that proper conduct and regulatory requirements and things are being met in the response in those specific areas. And then break things out into stages. You don't just run up Mount Everest. You have to break things out into stages. If you climb Mount Everest too fast, you die. You need to have, understand what's my project plan. This is my current state and this is my future state, what's the right roadmap to get me to that future state, and what's the right milestones along the way? So benefits of contextual awareness of compliance is we want to aim for agile accountability regime compliance, that we're more aware of our organization. We have structured definitions of our senior management functions, responsibility maps. We can align different departments to work together and be part of our accountability regime compliance. We're more responsive so that when there are issues, we can identify them, we can report them to the regulators, we can contain them when they're still small issues before they become big issues. We can become agile in the context of business change as there's mergers and acquisitions and growth, but resilient when there are issues and recover from them, but also, more importantly, be efficient in our use of human and financial technology, capital, human and financial capital, the greater efficiency there. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to see what questions we have.
Thank you, Michael. That was really interesting. So I think we've a couple of questions. I think for me, it would be really interesting to know if there were any organisations who you see are doing this very well at the minute, kind of what they're doing, how others can learn from them.
I can't name names because I don't have specific permission to name names, But there are organizations I've talked to that have implemented technology that have seen significant benefits to this whole process to make it more efficient, effective, and agile. So particularly within the United Kingdom, where most of my conversations have happened, with organizations that have implemented technology to be able to manage the overall fit and proper assessments, the responsibility maps, and maintaining those, reporting to regulations of senior management functions and approval process, and making sure there's structured workflow and tasks, and that all this reporting doesn't take significant man hours or human hours, I should say, in this day and age, to be able to compile that. It's really there to push of a button. And so there's several firms I've talked to that have moved away from manual processes to technology. Then they found significant gains, not only in the efficiency aspect, but that's critically where it is, but also the effectiveness. That there's greater insight, visibility, stronger documentation, and things as well.
Perfect. And I think from what you've said, obviously there are lots of different regulations in lots of different countries. So what would kind of be your best advice for an international organization who has to adhere to all of these different regulations? Is there kind of a call for it to be centralized all in one place, or because there's obviously a lot of differences, how do you kind of see the best way to approach that?
Well, I've seen organizations approach it country by country, and have different programs for different countries. And that works. But I think if the organization that really wants to take this to the heart is going to provide a unified strategy across the organization, that this is really about the integrity of the organization. It's a good thing, particularly in today's day and age with ESG, the environmental social governance focus, and the values of the organization, that we're going to manage an accountability program across the organization, and we're going to map in the different requirements across these different regulators, and understand there might be nuances where we have to tweak things for different jurisdictions here and there, but provide an overall structure and approach that's going to meet the requirements across the jurisdictions that we're in, because it's the heart of what good business is today. So to me, the proper way of doing it is to look at it globally and provide a global accountability program instead of fracturing it across jurisdictions.
Okay, and then so if you mentioned about kind of creating a roadmap of where people want to be in 2 years' time, how would you suggest that an organization, if they're kind of starting from zero, like best tips and advice, the first things that they should do to start getting on that roadmap?
Well, it's building that business case of where they're at now, where do they want to be, and what's the expected value. It's costing us this much to be compliant today. These new requirements and things are coming. It's going to add these much more, cost to us doing it this way. And if we move to another way, like automated with technology and things, how do we expect to reduce those costs? And building out that strong business case. When I look at business cases and help with them, I build them around those 3 pillars of efficiency, effectiveness, and agility. But there's things that are happening today, because these accountability regimes, for the most part, unless you're like in Ireland or Singapore, where things are just starting to come to bear, are there today. And so, what are you doing today, and how are you addressing that? Is the key thing, and what can we change to make it more efficient, effective, and agile?
Okay, and I suppose, are there any kind of common mistakes that people make when they're doing this? You've obviously mentioned technology is a big kind of enabler here. Are there kind of common things that people are doing that they could immediately kind of correct quite easily?
To me, the core of it is not having a strong audit trail and system of record. Even if you're doing this in manual processes, documents, spreadsheets, and emails, you need to be able to have a strong audit trail and system of record that's defensible with the regulators, that shows all the tasks that were done, when they were done, who they were done by, and so forth. I mean, to me, that's one big mistake. The other mistake I would say is, seeing this as a compliance exercise of just check boxes. To really achieve, the heart of the principle of these accountability regimes, makes it more, not just a compliance checkbox exercise, but actually the values and culture of the organization itself.
Okay, and then my last question before we let you go is, if you could give one tip now, that if people aren't doing any of this stuff, the first thing that they should do right now today, what would that be?
To me, it'd be to embrace this as the part of the culture and values of the organization, the heart of the integrity of the organization. That's the strategic advice, is to, that this isn't just a checkbox exercise, but to really achieve what the principle of this is. It's about building a stronger organization of integrity. And that it's a good thing to do, not just to appease the regulators, but to build a stronger organization. That's just the strategic theme. The tactical thing I would look at is, how do we automate this with technology? Because technology can help us achieve greater culture and integrity throughout all this, providing structured workflows and things, and not allowing things to slip through the cracks. And so strategically, I look at making this a part of the values and integrity of the organization, not just a compliance exercise. And tactically, I would look at, how do we automate this with technology to make sure that things don't slip through the cracks, and then we have a better defensible position and visibility into the organization.
Perfect. Okay, I think that's actually a great place to finish. So thank you so much for your time today, Michael. If we haven't answered any of your questions, we will follow up with you following on from the webinar. So all that is left to say is thank you very much, Michael, and have a good day, everyone. Thank you.